Hello and welcome to our talk, the place where we agree to disagree if we disagree at all. Today, my guest is Christine Low. She's currently in Los Angeles. She's also from Hong Kong. Our topic is civil responsibility. Hello, Christine. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so happy you're with us today. And what time is it in Los Angeles? Morning, early?
This is in the morning, a little after 8 a.m.
So I hope you've had your morning tea already. I'm already off caffeine because the evening is coming soon.
Well, I have my tea here, which I will drink with you.
Good for you. I want to speak with you about civil responsibility, what that means to you, how it has manifested, what you have done in your life, get to know you a little bit also in the process. So that is sort of the beginning of our conversation, more than halfway through. Towards the end, I would like to change the point of view and look a little bit into the future. Now, for the viewers, I'd like to introduce you briefly. I've got a few points here, like always, in the description of the YouTube and on our website. We will have all the necessary information, the references and the links where people can look it up. But for now, Christine Low is the Chief Development Strategist at the Institute for the Environment, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. She is a professor at UCLA Anderson School of Management. She was Undersecretary for the Environment in Hong Kong, 2012-17. She was a legislator in the better part of the 1990s. She was the CEO and I think the founder, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm curious then later to hear from you, Christine, because we cover in one of the art talks also the topic of founders and source. The CEO, founder of the Hong Kong nonprofit think tank, Civic Exchange, which is one of the top 50 think tanks in the world today. Christine has published extensively, including on the history of the Chinese Communist Party in Hong Kong and on many, many aspects of the environment. She has been advisor to the World Health Organization and the International Energy Agency on air pollution and public health. Professor Low, Christine, serves as a member on a number of boards, and all this, I haven't even started to mention her interests in arts. And I just recently discovered in an ambitious project whereby the food culture of southern China is practically being revolutionized. So welcome, Christine, to my little talk show here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
I hope I have covered a lot of the points, and you're free to correct me, of course. I felt having known you, followed your career for more or less closely for the last 35 years, I remembered there were times in Canada and in Korea when I was traveling still with my sons. The question was not whether we see you in the newspaper or on television. The question really was which page in the newspaper we would find you. So I'm saying that because I have reduced all this colorful life and a very colorful career to a few points. And I would like to add a bit of soul and heart to this by asking you a question. For the viewers also to get to know you a little bit better, Christine, if you look back in the last 35 years, your public figure, I'm not talking about you having a family, being a daughter, parents and background, but your public figure, the career you've made, what would you say has been the most pivotal achievement, or the crossroads, or what moved you emotionally? What sticks out spontaneously right now as I talk?
I think two things. And I guess I'll go in chronological order from one to the next. A pivotal change in my life was when I just finished university and I was waiting to start a new job. But because there was a gap in time, I returned from the UK to Hong Kong to study Chinese. Hong Kong was a British colony, and during the time when I was a child, it was the Cultural Revolution. It was a very difficult time in China, and it wasn't important to study Chinese. And my parents felt at the time that, China was going to be a mess. And it was really important that we focus on Hong Kong and outside Hong Kong. And to make a life, it was really important to be aware of what's happening, to be, excellent in English and so on. So, in fact, I never studied formally in Chinese, but I decided, because I had a period of time and China was embarking on opening up again, that I thought I should go and just do a full-time Chinese language course in Hong Kong, which was what I did. And it was because of that I ended up meeting you, in fact, because I joined the company Philip Brothers. They couldn't hire anyone to go and work in Beijing. And because I spoke very so-so Chinese at the time, having, almost finished that 1-year course, I went to Beijing. That was a pivotal change in my life. I had no idea what China was like. But actually, it was in the early 80s, and that was a time when China was beginning to open up again. And what a privilege that was to have been there at the time, to have been sort of a young, energetic, and quite open-minded person about what this was going to be like. So that was pivotal, I think, first of all, in my professional career at the time, which was in commodities trading, but it also was an entry point into Chinese politics, Chinese development, and eventually into my political career. But we can come back to that and talk about that if you're interested. The second transit was actually somehow to fall into politics. And that became a great part of my career. And still today, I mean, I'm not in frontline politics, but I'm very interested in public policy. How do you get things right? How do you move a community along on, so many things that we need to do? And I would say the single most important thing in my political career was to have participated in elections, because that requires you to go and knock on doors, to stand in street, to speak to people, to ask them to support you, to vote for you. I think there is nothing like that kind of experience. And you're not looking for, it's not like asking to be a class prefect, where you ask 30 or 40 people to support you. I need tens of thousands of votes. So that was a very humbling exercise. But the bit I wanted to say was, because I had to knock on doors, literally in Hong Kong, in high-rise buildings, I was able to have a view into people's lives, people's homes, who they were. I mean, this is up and down the socioeconomic strata in Hong Kong. And that was just the most amazing experience. And, that is really when I fully understood what being a part of a community means.
It's funny because during that time, of course, I knew that you were a politician, but I never saw you that much because in the classical sense of a career politician, I always had the feeling that you are very profoundly committed to not to the politics as such, but to the higher good of society, and of course civil responsibility is what we're talking about today. So that this is something I perceived very strongly in you at that time, and oftentimes you had to actually at that time. You were fighting for not only environment at that time already, but you were already also fighting for women's right, for example, at one point in time. And I know your life got threatened, and this isn't just coining a phrase here. This is actually literally so. And yet you kept on going with your profound commitment. And I always felt that you were driven by something else but the politics as such. Politics was like a platform. And I remember one conversation with you, which has stuck with me, when you actually needed to decide whether you're going to go through the motion of collecting all these votes, which a politician has to do. And it was a turning point where you actually had an experience coming to in contact, I guess, with your vision, and where you had ideas. And I believe that was the beginning of Civic Exchange, the think tank I mentioned earlier. Have I put that together, or is my memory false? Please.
I know it was a very strange time, and most of my friends, including sort of supporters and people who didn't support me, were surprised because I was quite popular. And there was no doubt that if I ran for election in the year 2000, that I would get back in. But I decided not to stand for re-election and to create a think tank, a non-profit think tank. And, you know, in the year 2000, people sort of said to me, nobody's going to give you any resources to do a kind of thinking job, you know. And indeed, when I went to people and asked them to support policy thinking, people said, well, you know, you can come up with all kinds of bright ideas, but no one would listen to you, surely. You know, the government didn't have to listen to you and so on. But I felt, actually having spent about 9 years, nearly 10 years in politics by then, that one of the problems with politics is, you know, you have a fairly narrow group of people who represent the community at large. And in Hong Kong, you know, at the time we had, I think, 60 legislators. We had, you know, millions of people, you know, so what are you really representing? And, you know, we were being asked, like, I think politicians everywhere, to vote on very important issues. And I did feel all the time when I was in frontline politics that we didn't always know what to do. And I felt that politicians in Hong Kong in those days, I mean, there wasn't many places you can go to and say, well, how do we begin to think about this? So that was why I created a non-profit public policy think tank. And I mean, I still feel today that politicians everywhere look at COVID-19, right? You know, what do you need to know about fighting infectious diseases? Because you have to vote for funds, you have to do all kinds of things. And we can look around the world, and politicians, because they're supposed to represent the people and make all these important decisions, whether based on science or whatever is their opinion, well, some of them get it wrong. So I felt it was really important to encourage politicians and other stakeholders, including members of the public, to take an interest in these big issues that we don't grow up just knowing all the answers to. It is a very humbling exercise. And I do think I'd like more people to be interested in public policy.
Yes, and many people, of course, we're privileged in Switzerland with a direct democracy that we have our fingertips pretty close to what's going on. And many Swiss people, unlike the situation in neighboring countries, are not primarily blaming things on the politicians, but are more conscious of the fact that they themselves, each of us, actually is a politician, so to speak. And in Switzerland, we can exercise that very regularly, 3-4 times per year, with decision making and influences and initiatives and so on. Would you think that the civic exchange, one important thing of that think tank is that, and I recall that this was a crucial thing for you, at least how I perceived you, that it needed to be as independent as possible, to have the freedom to be unattached and speak uncomfortable truths. Do I get that right? Is that something which drove?
I think two things, right? That we believed in, I still do, right? You know, at the think tank and today, I believe in evidence-based policies, not opinion-based. You know, when we're talking about things like climate change, when we're talking about how to decarbonize, when we're talking about how we might share the commonwealth of our economy more widely with people, it's not just our personal opinion. I mean, we might have preferences, but are they driven by, you know, our own bias, or is there any evidence to back certain things as to whether it works or not? And then, of course, there is the moral component that we need to consider as well. So I think it's not easy to make, you know, these very difficult decisions, particularly when you have to change something in society. And it's important to communicate to people, to be as clear as you can. And one thing that I learned in politics is you can have something on the front page of the newspaper, and today I guess is, you know, days and days in social media. I mean, you can have all of those things there, and there'll still be a large number of people who haven't heard about it. And that was one of the things that really woke me up when when I was a politician. I mean, we were not in the social media world in those days, but we did have a number of controversial issues where the issue was on the front page of newspapers every day for a number of days. But I ran into lots of people in the street, you know, and they said, "Oh, I hadn't heard of that." So I think how do governments, or how do civil society who are interested in policy, I mean, we must work so much harder to think of ways to explain things to people. And it's not just good enough to say, well, they're too stupid or they're not interested, because you do need, if you need some transformation, and let's pick something relatively non-political, like decarbonization. I mean, that's political enough, right? But where you have to carry the community along on a sustained basis from year to year to actually get things done.
Yes, you brought up a number of interesting points, and one of them actually was that we need to speak to each other, also to people who have very different opinions, which we may not approve of at all. And I personally think this is one of the greatest challenges we have right now. Particularly COVID has brought that up. So many families are split. They don't talk to each other anymore over COVID ideas and so on. But not only COVID, this is just, I think COVID was just a catalyst to mirror to society that we can either polarize and get stuck, or build bridges. I did blend in earlier the vision statement, actually, of the Civic Exchange, which I'm sure you have written also. But I take that off the screen. We carry on in our conversation. We're touching on important points. You know, I said earlier that I experienced how, and my art talks aren't about politics or about economy or ecology. they are about opinions of people and getting to know people within the Reiki community, and listen to each other's views. Very much in line with what you just said. We need to talk to each other. And when I did some research into your most recent work, and remembering the situation when your life was threatened by people who didn't share your opinion, who actually resisted your endeavors favoring women's rights at that time. I'm looking back at that time, but today I'm looking at things in your presentations, in your conversations. Most recently, I've listened to an online discussion, US-Hong Kong and US-China relationships. And I quote a few things from there, just catchwords. Work through division is a statement you made. Protests go from nonviolent to violent, narrative and counter-narrative, dialogue amongst the polarizing forces. Local politics is broken today. Hong Kong people need to solve the problem. We cannot ignore Beijing. It's not an enemy. We must not have the attitude of Beijing being an enemy. You're fighting for freedom of expression. You're fighting for building civil society and human rights. You know, when I make these quotes, all of them have this degree of extreme polarization. And you, Christine, you have constantly in all these discussions, somebody once said to me she deserves a Nobel Prize in reference to one of your presentations with the Hong Kong-Chinese relationship, Nobel Prize for Peace. You have constantly been building bridges. And that, to me, is one of your major achievements from where I look at your career. Which brings us a little bit about looking into the future, where to go from here. But do share with me, how do you deal with this, Christine, when you are torn between two poles, or when you find yourself between a rock and a hard place, right in the middle, which must, in this difficult engagements you have, not only as a politician, as a person who is fighting for so many things, because you interpret this as being part of a Civil Responsibility Act. How do you deal with this personally, emotionally? How do you cope?
Well, I think I learned also a lesson in as I grew up. In my younger days, high school and early 20s, because I come from a British education where making smart comments and debating well is seen as a great skill. Well, I realized that whilst that skill is great if you're in high school, or maybe if you're in British politics, it doesn't travel well culturally. Many cultures, including my own, Chinese culture, is focused on, in a way, respect. I mean, some people call that faith, but it's basically respect. So that's one lesson I've learned. Try not to be too smart and always respect the other person. The other thing that I found out as a politician, because I was knocking on doors and I had to go and approach all kinds of people for support, for discussions and so on, that I rather liked people. I mean, in a sense, I'm fascinated by other people. And I did have there was one particular person that I thought, God, he always thinks he knows everything and so on. And I always said, well, I don't think I like that person. But we were forced into a situation where we had to work with each other. And I discovered all kinds of things about this person that I thought was very positive. So I realized that actually most of the time we don't know many people. even in the social media world. You can have thousands of friends, but how many people are we capable of really getting to know? Relatively few in our lives. But I am interested in people. And I find that as I become interested in them, I don't really want to fight with them. It's not about being right or wrong. And in my time in politics, I learned over the years that it's better to be able to walk into any door. That means if I called somebody up and say, "Can I come and see you and talk to you about something?" that they would say, "Oh, sure, come," rather than say, "Oh, I never want to see her." But I find that when I talk to people, there are things of interest that I discover about them. And that is very critical to bridge building. And today, we do have a very highly polarized world. I mean, I'm sitting here in the United States, and, this is, one side and the next. In Hong Kong, again, the blue and the yellow. But at some stage, if we really wanted to solve problems, we have to sit down and talk. And whether it's between nations, US and China, EU and China, or within your little community, your town, your village, this is necessary. So actually, to be able to talk, we just need to put down our own emotions, finding a way to do that and listen to the other side, because very seldom when we're talking about a sort of social issue, that other sides have no good points to make at all. So I think listening, being able to truly listen to others is a vital ability for us to be able to empathize with others and be able to see the commonality where we can use that to build something that is, a solution to the problems that we have.
What a great introduction to talk about towards the end about the future. But I thank you so much for the words you just said. I have a number of viewers who have a spiritual interest, and I don't intend to talk about spirituality. But as you spoke, I thought, wow, you're paraphrasing, and more importantly, you're living a lot of the basic concepts any spiritual path will have in the forefront of daily practice. But let's talk about the future, and I've prepared something which I want to show to you first, Christine. Let's have a look. And listen quickly.
We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true.
Yes, that's the poet Gorman.
Did you see her at the inauguration?
It was marvelous. I mean, so marvelous, so marvelous, so moving, so marvelous.
She must have touched you.
Oh, very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this is a far stretch, of course. But what she's saying, I counted the we and the hours in her poem. She says 67 times we and 21 times our. And it's a manifestation of civil responsibility in an unbelievable way. And I felt that your entire life had like a red thread, had this theme. But to me, mostly, very often, I hear people, particularly in my age, what's happening with the young people? Where is the youth coming? Boy, she is 22.
Yes.
And she stood up there with all these old people, but she embodies to me so much confidence for the future. And I recently watched Greta Thunberg in a conversation with the Dalai Lama, another young person, and a person of color, and a woman who is not shy to say, who knows, maybe one day I'll be president of the United States. I find this is an example of where the future can go. There are so many people I speak to right now, whether they are ecologists or environmental people or whatever, economists. The gloom is there. You know, it's the end of if the world is close, and everybody agrees we cannot afford to wait, and we cannot afford to cosmetical changes of an electric car as the second car, or having vacation at home rather than flying to the Caribbean. These are as valuable and great that these decisions are, and that's what individuals can do, of course, but in a greater context, they're not enough, and it's high noon. And then somebody like that comes along, and I personally, I'm inspired and get a lot of confidence. So I would like to give you a few minutes to talk about our future together, Christine. Yeah, please.
I think one of the things that maybe people need to do, whether we're younger or older, is to be able to handle our own emotions. You know, a lot of things are driven by anger, and we might say that people have a lot to be angry about. But when you're trying to look for some solution, how can we deal with that side of our emotions to break things? You know, so I mean, there's lots of literature and great art around the world where it says, well, you probably have to break this to remake it. But the conception of what breaking things mean, you know, violence, dealing with that anger underneath, the destructive side, and the destructive side, not just of physical things, but of people's emotions, their lives, and so on. It's a very, very heavy price. So I think particularly younger people, they have that surge of energy and idealism. Is it fueled by anger? And if it is, how can we control that anger so that we can use our inspiration, our energy, and our righteousness in a positive and responsible way? That's not easy, because we are seeing in many parts of the world the anger coming through, and it's one of destruction. It's one of also seeing other people who are different from you, who have different views from you, as the enemy. This is very, very dangerous, and we start demonizing other people, your neighbors, you know, as you said earlier on, over COVID, you know, what governments should do. It's splitting families. I mean, you know, this is, what are you really doing? I mean, how can you reject your father, right? You know, if he has a different view on some government policy. So despite we have differences, and it's okay to have differences, how can we make some personal attempt on a day-to-day basis to understand that other people have a different view? We don't need to argue about everything, and we don't need to break relations, because it puts us in a space where we feel change is impossible when it is not.
Wow. Thank you very much, Christine. It's a wonderful closing. Thank you for having joined us. I hope to see you again. Maybe in half an year, we have a continuation of this conversation. It would be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
You're very welcome. Let me say bye-bye, Christine. Let me say goodbye to my viewers. Thank you very much for having watched. I hope you will subscribe to our channel or subscribe on our website. Thank you. And the next Art Talk will be out in 3 weeks' time. Bye-bye for now.